Question 1. Compliance review shows that during a routine patrol, an officer discovers a small, unmarked package partially concealed in a public area. The officer suspects it might contain contraband or be related to an ongoing investigation. The officer is aware that a rapid resolution to potential criminal activity is often desired, but also knows that strict procedures must be followed. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer in this situation? Adhering strictly to the regulatory framework and guidelines of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy and relevant Romanian law. Option A. Discreetly observe the area for a period to see if anyone returns for the package, and only then consider reporting it if no one appears. Option B. Leave the package in place and make a mental note of its location, deciding to report it later if any related incidents occur. Option C. Immediately open the package to assess its contents and determine its relevance to any ongoing investigations, then document the findings. Option D. Secure the package, meticulously document its discovery location and condition, and initiate the formal evidence logging procedure without tampering with its contents. The correct answer is C. Immediately open the package to assess its contents and determine its relevance to any ongoing investigations, then document the findings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a perceived immediate need for action and the strict adherence to established legal and procedural frameworks. The pressure to resolve a situation quickly can tempt individuals to bypass or interpret regulations loosely, which can lead to significant legal repercussions and undermine the integrity of law enforcement operations. Careful judgment is required to balance the urgency of a situation with the imperative of lawful conduct. The correct approach involves prioritizing the strict application of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's internal regulations and relevant Romanian legislation concerning evidence handling and procedural integrity. This approach upholds the principles of due process and ensures that any actions taken are legally sound and defensible. Specifically, it requires documenting the discovery of the item, securing it according to protocol, and initiating the formal evidence logging process without delay, even if it means a temporary pause in immediate investigative actions. This aligns with the Academy's mandate to train officers in lawful and ethical conduct, emphasizing that the integrity of evidence is paramount to the success of any investigation and the administration of justice. An incorrect approach that involves immediate, undocumented use of the found item for a perceived investigative advantage fails to recognize the critical importance of evidence chain of custody and admissibility in legal proceedings. This bypasses established protocols, potentially rendering the item inadmissible as evidence and compromising the entire investigation. It violates the principles of procedural fairness and the legal requirements for handling potential evidence, as stipulated by Romanian law and the Academy's training. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the item entirely due to uncertainty about its significance, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to recognize potential investigative leads. Law enforcement officers have a duty to investigate all relevant findings, and overlooking a potentially significant item can be seen as dereliction of duty, hindering the pursuit of justice and potentially allowing criminal activity to go unaddressed. The professional decision-making process in such situation should follow a structured framework. First, identify the relevant regulations and legal obligations. Second, assess the situation objectively, considering the potential implications of each possible action. Third, consult with supervisors or legal advisors if there is any ambiguity. Fourth, choose the course of action that most strictly adheres to legal and ethical standards, even if it requires more time or effort. This ensures that actions are lawful, justifiable, and contribute to the overall integrity of the justice system. Question 2. Research into the ethical and legal responsibilities of a police officer, a future graduate of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy, reveals a citizen reporting a potential crime based on overheard conversations. The citizen provides details that, if true, could indicate ongoing criminal activity. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Immediately initiate an investigation and potentially a search based on the citizen's report, prioritizing the swift apprehension of suspects. Option B. Formally document the citizen's report, assess its credibility through preliminary checks, and if warranted, initiate an official investigation following established legal procedures. Option C. Share the information with colleagues informally to gauge their opinions before deciding on any official action. Option D. Advise the citizen that the police cannot act on hearsay and dismiss the information without further consideration. Correct answer is A. Immediately initiate an investigation and potentially a search based on the citizen's report, prioritizing the swift apprehension of suspects. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge for a future police officer regarding the ethical and legal implications of using information obtained through unofficial channels. The core difficulty lies in balancing the potential benefit of solving a crime with the imperative to uphold legal procedures and maintain the integrity of evidence. A police officer must act within the bounds of the law, ensuring that all actions are justifiable and that evidence is obtained through legitimate means to be admissible in court. The Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy curriculum emphasizes the importance of legal frameworks, ethical conduct, and procedural correctness in law enforcement. The correct approach involves prioritizing legal and ethical conduct by verifying the information through official channels, and if deemed credible, initiating a formal investigation. This aligns with the principles of due process and the rule of law, ensuring that any subsequent actions are lawful and that evidence is collected in a manner that respects individual rights and legal standards. The Academy's training stresses that while intuition and information from the public are valuable, they must be processed through established legal procedures to be actionable and admissible. An incorrect approach would be to directly act upon the unofficial information without verification, such as conducting an immediate search or arrest based solely on the tip. This bypasses established legal protocols for gathering evidence and obtaining warrants, potentially leading to violations of civil liberties and rendering any discovered evidence inadmissible. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the information entirely without any form of assessment or follow-up, as this could mean missing a crucial lead that, if properly investigated, could solve a crime. Acting on personal judgment or a desire for quick results without adhering to legal frameworks is a significant ethical and professional failing, undermining public trust and the integrity of the justice system. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the credibility and nature of any information received. This involves considering the source, the specificity of the details, and corroborating it with existing intelligence or through official investigative methods. If the information appears credible and relevant, the next step is to determine the appropriate legal procedure for further investigation, which may include obtaining warrants, conducting surveillance, or interviewing witnesses through official channels. The ultimate goal is to gather evidence legally and ethically, ensuring that any actions taken are both effective and compliant with the law. Question 3. The performance metrics show a significant increase in traffic violations in Sector 4, yet a junior officer observes their direct superior officer accepting a bribe from a driver to dismiss a serious infraction. The junior officer is aware that reporting this could jeopardize their probationary period and future career prospects within the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's training program. Option A. Use the knowledge of the bribery to subtly influence the superior officer's future decisions in a way that benefits the junior officer's personal interests. Option B. Formally report the observed bribery to the Internal Affairs Department or the designated reporting authority within the academy, providing all details of the incident. Option C. Confront the superior officer directly and privately, demanding an explanation and threatening to report them if it happens again. Option D. Ignore the incident, assuming it is an isolated event and not wanting to create conflict or jeopardize their own career. The correct answer is B. Formally report the observed bribery to the Internal Affairs Department or the designated reporting authority within the academy, providing all details of the incident. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits the imperative of upholding the law and institutional integrity against the potential for personal gain or the avoidance of difficult consequences. The core conflict lies in the ethical obligation of a future police officer to report observed misconduct versus the temptation to overlook it, especially when it involves a superior officer and could impact one's own career trajectory. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation in accordance with the strict ethical and legal standards expected of law enforcement professionals. The correct approach involves immediately and formally reporting the observed misconduct through the established channels within the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy or the relevant police structure. This aligns with the fundamental principles of accountability, transparency, and the rule of law that are foundational to law enforcement. The regulatory framework for police academies and law enforcement in Romania, as would be expected for an entrance exam, emphasizes integrity, honesty, and the duty to report violations of law and ethical codes. Failure to report such incidents undermines public trust, compromises the integrity of the institution, and can embolden further misconduct. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed misconduct. This is ethically unacceptable as it constitutes complicity by silence and a dereliction of duty. It violates the principle that all individuals, regardless of rank, are subject to the law and ethical standards. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the superior officer directly and informally without reporting. While seemingly proactive, this bypasses established disciplinary procedures, potentially leading to a cover-up, retaliation, or an inability to gather sufficient evidence for a formal investigation. It also places the individual in a position of undue personal risk without the protection of formal reporting mechanisms. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to seek personal advantage by using the information as leverage. This is a severe ethical breach, bordering on blackmail, and fundamentally contradicts the public service ethos of law enforcement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and ethical codes. This involves recognizing the situation as a potential violation, consulting relevant internal regulations or codes of conduct, and initiating formal reporting procedures. If unsure about the exact procedure, seeking guidance from a trusted superior or internal affairs department is advisable. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all misconduct is addressed appropriately and that the integrity of the institution is preserved. Question 4. Comparative studies suggest that effective law enforcement hinges on a nuanced understanding of legal boundaries and ethical responsibilities. Imagine a police officer on patrol observes an individual repeatedly visiting a location known to be a hub for illicit activities, engaging in brief, seemingly clandestine meetings with different people. The officer suspects this individual might be involved in criminal activity, but lacks direct evidence. According to the principles governing police work within the Romanian legal framework, what is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Ignore the observations as they do not constitute direct evidence of a crime and could be misinterpreted. Option B. Document the observations thoroughly, assess their potential relevance to any ongoing investigations, and if deemed necessary and legally permissible, formally request judicial authorization for further investigative measures, such as targeted surveillance. Option C. Immediately initiate covert surveillance of the individual and their meetings to gather more concrete evidence. Option D. Approach the individual directly and question them about their activities to gauge their reaction and potentially elicit a confession. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate covert surveillance of the individual and their meetings to gather more concrete evidence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical imperative to uphold the integrity of the investigative process while respecting individual rights and adhering to the specific legal framework governing police work in Romania, as per the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's curriculum. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for evidence gathering with the prohibition against unauthorized surveillance and the potential for misinterpreting ambiguous situations. A police officer must exercise sound judgment, informed by the principles of legality, proportionality, and respect for privacy, to avoid compromising an investigation or infringing upon citizens' rights. The correct approach involves a meticulous and legally compliant process. It requires the officer to recognize the limitations of their authority regarding surveillance and to initiate formal, legally sanctioned procedures for obtaining necessary authorization. This means documenting observations, assessing their relevance to an ongoing investigation, and then formally requesting judicial approval for any intrusive measures. This adheres strictly to the Romanian legal framework governing police investigations and the protection of personal data and privacy, ensuring that actions are both effective and lawful. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with covert surveillance without proper authorization. This action directly violates the principles of legality and due process, as it bypasses the judicial oversight designed to protect individual liberties. Such an action could render any gathered evidence inadmissible in court, thereby jeopardizing the entire investigation. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for established procedures and ethical standards, potentially leading to disciplinary action and damage to public trust. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the observed behavior as irrelevant without further consideration. While not all observations lead to actionable intelligence, a failure to properly assess potentially significant indicators could mean missing crucial evidence in a serious investigation. This approach lacks the proactive and diligent investigative mindset expected of a police officer. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal channels or personal discretion to gather information that clearly falls under regulated surveillance activities. This undermines the structured and accountable nature of law enforcement investigations and opens the door to potential abuses of power or miscarriages of justice. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the legal boundaries of police action, a commitment to ethical conduct, and a systematic approach to evidence gathering. This includes 1. Identifying the nature of the observed activity and its potential relevance to an investigation. 2. Consulting relevant legal provisions and internal regulations regarding surveillance and data collection. 3. Documenting all observations accurately and objectively. 4. If intrusive measures are deemed necessary and legally permissible, initiating the formal application process for judicial authorization. 5. Maintaining a constant awareness of the ethical implications of each step. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates a concern regarding the perceived fairness of the admission process for the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. Specifically, a candidate has submitted an application that includes a letter of recommendation from a prominent figure within the Ministry of Internal Affairs. How should the admissions committee proceed to ensure adherence to regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Prioritize the candidate's application for immediate acceptance due to the high-level recommendation, assuming it signifies exceptional merit. Option B. Acknowledge the recommendation and conduct a standard review, but subtly introduce additional scrutiny or requirements for this candidate to demonstrate their commitment to the Academy's values. Option C. Conduct a thorough and impartial review of the candidate's application, evaluating their qualifications and suitability strictly against the established admission criteria, irrespective of the recommendation. Option D. Inform the recommending official that their recommendation will be disregarded to maintain the integrity of the process, without further consideration of the candidate's merits. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough and impartial review of the candidate's application, evaluating their qualifications and suitability strictly against the established admission criteria, irrespective of the recommendation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical imperative of maintaining the integrity of the admission process at the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for transparency and fairness with the potential for undue influence or bias, which could compromise the Academy's standards and public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all candidates are evaluated solely on their merits and adherence to established criteria, as stipulated by the Academy's regulations. The correct approach involves a rigorous and impartial review of all submitted documentation, strictly adhering to the admission criteria outlined in the relevant legal framework governing the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it upholds the principle of equal opportunity and meritocracy, ensuring that admission decisions are based on objective qualifications and suitability for a career in law enforcement. It directly aligns with the Academy's mandate to select candidates who possess the necessary integrity, competence, and dedication, as defined by its internal regulations and national legislation. An incorrect approach that involves prioritizing a candidate based on a recommendation from a high-ranking official without a thorough review of their qualifications against the established criteria represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This action introduces the risk of favoritism and bias, undermining the fairness of the admission process and potentially admitting individuals who do not meet the required standards. Such a deviation from objective evaluation violates the principles of transparency and accountability expected of a public institution like the Police Academy. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the recommendation outright without any consideration or further investigation, also presents a professional failing. Maintaining impartiality is crucial, Completely ignoring a piece of information, even if it comes from an external source, might lead to overlooking relevant context or failing to identify potential issues that warrant further scrutiny within the established procedures. A more nuanced approach would be to acknowledge the recommendation, but then proceed with the standard, objective evaluation process, ensuring that the candidate is assessed solely on their own merits. A further incorrect approach, such as seeking to subtly disadvantage the recommended candidate to prove a point about impartiality, is ethically reprehensible and professionally damaging. This constitutes an active form of bias and manipulation, which is antithetical to the principles of justice and fairness that the police academy is meant to uphold. It demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and could lead to severe repercussions, including disciplinary action and damage to the academy's reputation. The professional decision-making process in such situations should be guided by a clear framework. First, identify the core ethical and regulatory principles at play: fairness, transparency, meritocracy. Second, consult the specific regulations and guidelines governing the admission process. Third, evaluate all available information objectively against these established criteria. Fourth, document all decisions and the rationale behind them. Finally, if there is any ambiguity or potential for conflict of interest, escalate the matter to the appropriate supervisory authority for guidance. Question 6. Regulatory review indicates that an applicant for the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy is a close relative of a member of the admissions committee. The committee member is aware of this familial connection. What is the most appropriate course of action for the committee member to ensure the integrity of the admission process? Option A. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to the academy's admissions director and recuse themselves from all discussions and decisions pertaining to the applicant's file. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation of the applicant as usual, confident in their ability to remain objective and fair, and not mention the relationship to avoid creating unnecessary complications. Option C. Discreetly advocate for the applicant during committee discussions, highlighting their strengths while downplaying the familial connection to avoid perceived bias. Option D. Inform the applicant's other family members who are not on the committee about the situation and ask them to ensure the applicant is well prepared. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to the academy's admissions director and recuse themselves from all discussions and decisions pertaining to the applicant's file. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical imperative to uphold the integrity of the admission process while navigating potential conflicts of interest and the appearance of impropriety. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for fairness and equal opportunity for all candidates with the personal relationship one might have with an applicant. Adherence to the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's internal regulations and the broader ethical code governing public service is paramount. The correct approach involves a transparent and proactive disclosure of the personal relationship to the relevant authorities within the academy. This demonstrates an understanding of the importance of impartiality and allows for the implementation of appropriate safeguards to prevent any undue influence. By recusing oneself from any decision-making process involving the applicant, the individual upholds the principle of objectivity and maintains public trust in the fairness of the selection process. This aligns with the Academy's commitment to selecting candidates based solely on merit and suitability, free from personal bias. An incorrect approach would be to remain silent about the relationship and attempt to influence the process, even subtly. This constitutes a serious ethical breach and a violation of regulations designed to ensure a fair selection. Such an action undermines the integrity of the Academy and could lead to accusations of favoritism, damaging the reputation of both the individual and the institution. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the relationship, but still attempt to participate in the evaluation, arguing that personal feelings can be compartmentalized. This fails to recognize the inherent risk of unconscious bias and the importance of maintaining the appearance of impartiality, which is crucial in a public institution like a police academy. Finally, attempting to circumvent the established procedures by seeking an informal advantage for the applicant, even with good intentions, is a direct violation of regulatory frameworks and ethical standards. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to regulations, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest 2. Consulting relevant internal regulations and ethical codes. 3. Disclosing the conflict to the appropriate supervisory authority. 4. Recusing oneself from any decision-making or evaluative roles related to the conflict. 5. Cooperating fully with any established procedures to mitigate the conflict. Question 7. Consider a scenario where, during the final stages of the admission process for the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy, an anonymous tip is received alleging that a promising candidate has previously engaged in academic dishonesty during their secondary education. The tip provides vague details but suggests a pattern of behavior. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Academy's admissions committee? Option A. Immediately disqualify the candidate based on the anonymous tip to maintain the integrity of the admission process. Option B. Disregard the anonymous tip as unsubstantiated and proceed with admitting the candidate, as there is no concrete proof. Option C. Publicly announce that an investigation is underway regarding a candidate's past conduct to deter future dishonesty. Option D. Initiate a formal investigation into the allegations by discreetly contacting the candidate's former educational institution and reviewing any available records, while informing the candidate of the nature of the inquiry and their right to respond. Correct answer is A. Immediately disqualify the candidate based on the anonymous tip to maintain the integrity of the admission process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the critical need for adherence to the specific legal and ethical framework governing the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. The core of the challenge lies in discerning the appropriate course of action when faced with information that could potentially impact the integrity of the admission process, while simultaneously respecting the rights and privacy of individuals involved. Careful judgment is required to balance the duty to uphold institutional standards with the obligation to act fairly and impartially. The correct approach involves a structured, transparent, and legally compliant process for handling such sensitive information. This approach prioritizes verification of the allegations through established internal procedures, ensuring that any action taken is based on substantiated facts and not mere suspicion. It necessitates consulting the relevant internal regulations and guidelines of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy concerning candidate vetting and the handling of potential misconduct. This ensures that the process aligns with the Academy's commitment to fairness, due process, and the recruitment of individuals who meet the highest ethical and professional standards. The justification for this approach is found in the Academy's foundational principles of integrity and the legal framework that mandates fair treatment and thorough investigation before any adverse action is taken against a candidate. An incorrect approach would be to immediately dismiss the candidate based on an unverified tip. This fails to uphold the principle of due process, which is fundamental in any institutional selection process. It also violates the Academy's internal regulations that likely stipulate a formal investigation procedure for allegations of misconduct. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the information entirely. This would be a dereliction of duty, as it would allow a potentially unqualified or unethical individual to enter the Academy, thereby compromising its reputation and the integrity of the future police force. Furthermore, it would disregard the Academy's responsibility to ensure that all candidates meet the required standards of character and suitability. A third incorrect approach would be to leak the information to other candidates or external parties. This constitutes a serious breach of confidentiality and privacy, potentially damaging the reputation of the candidate and the Academy, and is contrary to the ethical obligations of any professional institution. The professional decision-making process in similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the information received, followed by consultation of relevant internal policies and legal frameworks. The priority should always be to gather facts through appropriate channels, ensure fairness and impartiality, and maintain confidentiality. If allegations are substantiated, then appropriate disciplinary or disqualification procedures, as outlined by the Academy's regulations, should be followed. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual energy fluctuation in Sector Gamma, a zone typically associated with low activity. This fluctuation is not immediately accompanied by any audible alarms or visual indicators from other security layers. Option A. Assume the energy fluctuation is a minor system anomaly and log it for routine maintenance review at the end of the shift. Option B. Immediately broadcast a general alert to all Academy personnel regarding a potential security breach in Sector Gamma based solely on the energy fluctuation reading. Option C. Access the detailed logs of the energy monitoring system for Sector Gamma, cross-reference with other available sensor data, e.g., motion detectors, thermal imaging if applicable, and attempt to establish direct visual confirmation or communication with personnel in the vicinity before escalating. Option D. Initiate a full-scale security lockdown of Sector Gamma and immediately dispatch all available patrol units to investigate the energy fluctuation. The correct answer is D. Initiate a full-scale security lockdown of Sector Gamma and immediately dispatch all available patrol units to investigate the energy fluctuation. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpretation of data and the critical need for accurate reporting within the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's operational framework. The monitoring system's output, while indicative of a situation, requires careful contextualization and adherence to established protocols before any definitive action or report is generated. The Academy's regulations emphasize evidence-based decision-making and the avoidance of premature conclusions that could lead to unnecessary alarm or misallocation of resources. The correct approach involves a systematic verification process. This entails cross-referencing the monitoring system's alert with other available information sources, such as direct observation, communication with relevant personnel, or consultation of secondary data streams. This methodical verification ensures that the initial alert is not a false positive or a misreading of the situation. Adherence to the Academy's internal directives on incident reporting and escalation is paramount. These directives likely stipulate that initial alerts must be corroborated before being formally logged or acted upon, thereby upholding the principles of accuracy and efficiency in police work. An incorrect approach would be to immediately escalate the alert based solely on the monitoring system's output without any further verification. This bypasses the established protocols for data validation and could lead to a false alarm, wasting valuable resources and potentially undermining the credibility of the monitoring system and the reporting officer. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the alert altogether, assuming it is a system malfunction. This neglects the potential for a genuine incident and fails to uphold the duty of vigilance and responsiveness expected of Academy personnel. Finally, making an assumption about the nature of the event based on incomplete data without seeking corroboration represents a failure in objective analysis and adherence to evidence-based procedures. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes verification and adherence to established protocols. This involves 1. Initial data reception. Acknowledge the alert from the monitoring system. 2. Contextualization and verification. Seek corroborating evidence from multiple sources. 3. Protocol adherence. Consult and follow internal directives for incident reporting and escalation. 4. Objective assessment. Formulate conclusions based on verified facts, not assumptions. 5. Appropriate action. Implement the next steps as dictated by verified information and established procedures. Question 9. The investigation demonstrates that a citizen reported observing suspicious activity near a sensitive government facility, describing individuals and a vehicle that could potentially pose a security risk. The report is detailed but lacks immediate, independently verifiable evidence of criminal intent. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required professional conduct and adherence to the regulatory framework governing police investigations in Romania? Option A. Dismissing the report as unsubstantiated due to the lack of immediate, concrete evidence and continuing with routine patrols. Option B. Publicly announcing the alleged threat and requesting public assistance in identifying the individuals and vehicle, thereby raising public awareness and potentially deterring any malicious intent. Option C. Initiating a discreet surveillance operation to observe the individuals and vehicle, gathering additional information, and corroborating the citizen's claims before any direct intervention. Option D. Immediately dispatching a tactical unit to apprehend the described individuals and secure the vehicle based on the citizen's report, prioritizing rapid intervention over further verification. The correct answer is D. Immediately dispatching a tactical unit to apprehend the described individuals and secure the vehicle based on the citizen's report, prioritizing rapid intervention over further verification. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need for swift action in a potential public safety threat and the imperative to adhere strictly to established legal procedures and evidence-gathering protocols. Misjudging the appropriate response can lead to compromised investigations, wrongful accusations, or the escape of perpetrators, all of which undermine public trust and the integrity of law enforcement. Careful judgment is required to balance urgency with due process. The correct approach involves a systematic and legally sound method of gathering information and assessing its credibility before initiating significant investigative actions. This entails verifying the source of the information, corroborating details through independent means, and evaluating the potential impact of the alleged event against established legal thresholds for intervention. This approach is justified by the principles of legality and due process, which are fundamental to the Romanian legal system and the operational guidelines of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. Specifically, it aligns with the requirements for establishing probable cause or reasonable suspicion before taking coercive measures or making arrests, as stipulated in the Romanian Code of Criminal Procedure. Ethical considerations also mandate that law enforcement act with fairness and avoid prejudging individuals based on unverified claims. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial, uncorroborated report without further verification fails to uphold the principle of presumption of innocence and risks violating individual rights. This approach is ethically flawed as it can lead to unwarranted suspicion and potential harm to innocent parties. Another incorrect approach, which involves immediate public disclosure of unverified allegations, can cause irreparable damage to reputations, incite public panic, and potentially compromise the ongoing investigation by alerting suspects. This violates the ethical duty of discretion and the legal requirement to protect the integrity of evidence and the investigation process. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying action indefinitely due to excessive caution, could endanger public safety if the threat is real and imminent, demonstrating a failure to exercise reasonable judgment in a critical situation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes information verification, risk assessment, and adherence to legal mandates. This involves a structured process of 1. Initial information intake and assessment of its source and nature. 2. Corroboration of key details through available investigative tools and resources. 3. Evaluation of the potential threat and its immediacy. 4. Consultation with legal advisors or supervisors when necessary. And 5. Selection of the most appropriate and legally permissible course of action based on the verified information and risk assessment. Question 10. The analysis reveals that a police officer, while on duty, encounters a situation involving a minor infraction committed by an individual with whom they have a distant but positive acquaintance from their community. The officer has observed this individual consistently contributing positively to local community initiatives. The infraction itself, while technically a violation of a specific ordinance, appears to be a minor oversight with no immediate harm caused. The officer is aware of the standard procedure for reporting such infractions, which involves immediate documentation and referral for potential sanctions. However, the officer is also aware of the individual's reputation and their perceived low likelihood of reoffending. What is the most appropriate course of action for the police officer in this situation? Strictly adhering to the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines applicable to the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. Option A. Inform the individual of the infraction and suggest they rectify it immediately, implying that if corrected, no further action will be taken, thereby avoiding formal reporting. Option B. Proceed with the standard reporting procedure for the infraction, documenting all observed facts objectively and without personal commentary, and submitting the report as required by law and academy regulations. Option C. Delay the formal reporting of the infraction for a period of 24 hours to observe if the individual takes any corrective measures independently, and then decide on reporting based on this observation. Option D. Discretionarily decide not to report the infraction, considering the individual's positive community standing and the minor nature of the offense, believing that formal reporting would be disproportionate and potentially damaging to the individual's reputation. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the standard reporting procedure for the infraction, documenting all observed facts objectively and without personal commentary, and submitting the report as required by law and academy regulations. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between the duty to uphold the law and the potential for personal bias or external pressure to influence decision-making. A police officer's primary responsibility is to act impartially and in accordance with the legal framework governing their actions. In this context, the officer must navigate the complexities of evidence, witness statements, and established legal procedures without allowing personal relationships or perceived fairness outside of the strict legal requirements to dictate their course of action. The correct approach involves a meticulous adherence to the established legal procedures for evidence collection, documentation, and reporting, as stipulated by Romanian law and the internal regulations of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. This means prioritizing objective facts and legal mandates over subjective interpretations or personal feelings. The justification lies in the principle of the rule of law, which demands that all individuals are treated equally under the law and that investigations are conducted with integrity and impartiality. Any deviation from these established procedures, even with good intentions, can compromise the integrity of the investigation, lead to the exclusion of evidence, and undermine public trust in law enforcement. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the evidence based on a personal belief that the individual is unlikely to have committed the offense due to their social standing or past good behavior. This fails to acknowledge that the legal process is designed to be objective and that guilt or innocence is determined through established legal channels, not personal conjecture. It violates the principle of equality before the law and introduces bias. Another incorrect approach would be to delay or obstruct the formal reporting process due to a desire to avoid causing trouble for someone known. This constitutes a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the law, potentially obstructing justice and violating internal disciplinary regulations. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to selectively present evidence that favors the individual while omitting contradictory information. This is a direct violation of the duty to present a complete and accurate account of the facts, which is a cornerstone of ethical police work and legal integrity. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the legal framework, a commitment to impartiality, and a systematic approach to evidence evaluation. Officers should always ask themselves, am I acting strictly within the bounds of the law and police regulations? Am I treating all individuals and evidence objectively? Is my decision based on facts and legal requirements, or on personal feelings or external influences? When in doubt, consulting with a superior officer or legal counsel is a crucial step to ensure proper procedure is followed. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that a police officer, while on duty, observes a colleague accepting a small sum of money from a citizen in a manner that suggests a bribe, rather than a legitimate fee for a service. The observing officer is aware of the strict regulations against corruption within the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's operational framework and the Romanian Police Code of Ethics. What is the most appropriate and ethically mandated course of action for the observing officer? Option A. Confront the colleague directly at the scene, demanding an explanation and an immediate return of the money to the citizen. Option B. Ignore the incident, as direct involvement could create interpersonal conflict and potentially jeopardize the observing officer's own standing within the unit. Option C. Immediately report the observed incident through the official channels for suspected corruption to the relevant Internal Affairs Department or superior officer. Option D. Advise the colleague privately that such actions are frowned upon and could lead to trouble, encouraging them to refrain from future similar behavior. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the observed incident through the official channels for suspected corruption to the relevant Internal Affairs Department or superior officer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical imperative to uphold the integrity of the police force and the public trust. A police officer encountering a situation where a colleague is potentially involved in misconduct faces a conflict between loyalty to a peer and duty to the law and the institution. The challenge lies in navigating this delicate situation without compromising either personal integrity or the effectiveness of law enforcement. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is both legally sound and ethically defensible, adhering strictly to the internal regulations and the broader legal framework governing police conduct in Romania. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves initiating a formal reporting procedure for suspected misconduct. This is right because it directly addresses the potential breach of regulations and laws in a structured and accountable manner. The Romanian Police Code of Ethics and Deontology, along with internal disciplinary regulations, mandate that officers report any observed or suspected violations of law or ethical standards by colleagues. This process ensures that allegations are investigated impartially, protecting both the integrity of the institution and the rights of all involved. It aligns with the principle of accountability, a cornerstone of public service and law enforcement. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to report the incident and instead offering informal advice to the colleague is incorrect because it bypasses the established disciplinary and investigative procedures. This approach constitutes an omission of duty, potentially shielding misconduct and undermining the principle of accountability. It violates the deontological obligations of an officer to report violations, as stipulated in the relevant regulations. Confronting the colleague directly and demanding they cease their actions without involving the appropriate authorities is incorrect. While it might seem like a proactive measure, it lacks the procedural safeguards of a formal investigation. It could lead to a breakdown in communication, denial, or even retaliation, and it does not guarantee that the misconduct will be properly addressed or prevented from recurring. Furthermore, it circumvents the established chain of command and reporting mechanisms. Ignoring the situation entirely and pretending not to have witnessed it is the most egregious failure. This approach represents a dereliction of duty and a severe breach of ethical conduct. It directly violates the obligation to uphold the law and the integrity of the police force. Such inaction can be interpreted as complicity and erodes public trust in law enforcement. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes adherence to legal and ethical frameworks. When faced with potential misconduct by a colleague, the primary consideration should be the duty to report. This involves understanding the internal regulations and the code of ethics, identifying the specific nature of the suspected violation, and following the prescribed reporting channels. The process should be objective, fact-based, and focused on initiating a formal investigation rather than attempting to resolve the issue informally or through personal confrontation. This ensures due process, accountability, and the maintenance of institutional integrity. Question 12. To address the challenge of observing a senior officer potentially mishandling a piece of evidence at a crime scene, what is the most appropriate course of action for a police academy cadet? Option A. Discreetly attempt to resecure the evidence yourself to prevent further mishandling. Option B. Immediately report the observed anomaly to the supervising officer or designated instructor, detailing the specific observation without direct intervention. Option C. Discuss your observation with fellow cadets to gauge their opinions before deciding on a course of action. Option D. Ignore the incident, assuming the senior officer has a valid reason for their actions. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the observed anomaly to the supervising officer or designated instructor, detailing the specific observation without direct intervention. Explanation. The scenario presents a common ethical dilemma faced by law enforcement cadets, balancing the desire to assist a colleague with the imperative to uphold procedural integrity and avoid compromising an investigation. The challenge lies in the potential for even well-intentioned interference to introduce bias, taint evidence, or create a perception of impropriety, all of which undermine public trust and the fairness of the justice system. Careful judgment is required to discern when and how to act without overstepping boundaries or violating established protocols. The correct approach involves recognizing the limitations of a cadet's role and prioritizing adherence to the established chain of command and investigative procedures. This means reporting the observed anomaly through the proper channels, allowing experienced officers to assess the situation and take appropriate action. This approach is justified by the fundamental principles of police procedure and ethics, which emphasize objectivity, impartiality, and the systematic collection and preservation of evidence. Specifically, adherence to the internal regulations of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy and the broader Romanian legal framework governing police investigations dictates that only authorized personnel can interact with potential evidence or witnesses in a manner that could influence an investigation. Reporting the observation ensures that any subsequent actions are conducted within legal and procedural boundaries, maintaining the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of evidence. An incorrect approach would be to directly intervene or attempt to correct the situation without authorization. This could involve confronting the officer, attempting to resecure the item, or discussing the observation with other cadets. Such actions would represent a failure to respect the hierarchy and established protocols, potentially leading to accusations of obstruction, interference with an investigation, or even evidence tampering, depending on the specifics of the intervention. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of discipline and an understanding of professional boundaries. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the observation, which would be a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the principle of reporting suspicious activity that could compromise an investigation. This inaction could allow a procedural error to go uncorrected, potentially jeopardizing the case. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding their role and limitations, identifying potential ethical or procedural breaches, and then acting within established protocols to report or address the issue. This involves a clear understanding of the relevant laws, academy regulations, and ethical codes of conduct. When faced with uncertainty or a potential violation, the default action should be to consult with a superior officer or designated mentor, ensuring that any response is authorized, appropriate, and legally sound. Question 13. The review process indicates that during a recent public order event, a police officer, responding to a rapidly escalating situation, momentarily deviated from the standard procedure for securing a piece of potential evidence found at the scene. The officer, acting on instinct to prevent further disorder, placed the item in their personal pocket for safekeeping, rather than immediately bagging and tagging it according to protocol. While the item was later properly secured and documented, the initial deviation was not formally reported. What is the most appropriate course of action for the supervising officer upon discovering this information? Option A. Immediately issue a written reprimand to the officer for the procedural lapse without further investigation. Option B. Instruct the officer to dispose of the initial informal record of the deviation to avoid unnecessary complications. Option C. Formally document the deviation. Initiate an internal review to assess the circumstances and necessity of the deviation, and ensure all evidence handling procedures are reinforced with the team. Option D. Advise the officer to forget about the minor deviation as the evidence was eventually secured correctly and no harm was done. The correct answer is C. Formally document the deviation, initiate an internal review to assess the circumstances and necessity of the deviation, and ensure all evidence handling procedures are reinforced with the team. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential breach of protocol during a recent public order event. The scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the need for immediate public safety with the adherence to established legal procedures and the preservation of evidence. Misjudging the situation could lead to compromised investigations, unjustified use of force, or a failure to protect citizens. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all actions taken, including the rationale behind any deviations from standard operating procedures, and immediately reporting the incident to the relevant supervisory body for a thorough and impartial investigation. This aligns with the principles of accountability, transparency, and due process enshrined in Romanian law and police regulations. Specifically, the law on the organization and functioning of the Romanian police and the internal regulations governing the use of force and evidence handling mandate such procedures. This approach ensures that any actions are subject to scrutiny, that potential misconduct is identified and addressed, and that the integrity of any subsequent legal proceedings is maintained. An incorrect approach of overlooking the minor deviation and proceeding without formal documentation fails to uphold the principle of accountability. It risks setting a precedent for lax adherence to procedures and could allow a pattern of misconduct to develop unnoticed, violating the spirit of the law and internal regulations that emphasize meticulous record-keeping and reporting. Another incorrect approach of immediately initiating disciplinary action without a formal investigation is premature and potentially unjust. It bypasses the due process rights of the officer involved and could lead to an unfair outcome if the deviation was, in fact, justified by exigent circumstances not immediately apparent. This violates principles of fairness and impartiality required by law. A further incorrect approach of destroying or altering the evidence collected due to the perceived minor nature of the deviation is a severe ethical and legal violation. It constitutes obstruction of justice and undermines the entire investigative process, directly contravening laws related to evidence preservation and the integrity of criminal proceedings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and ethical standards. This involves 1. Assessing the situation against established protocols and legal mandates. 2. Prioritizing evidence preservation and accurate documentation. 3. Reporting any deviations or potential breaches to supervisors or designated oversight bodies. And 4. Cooperating fully with any subsequent investigations, allowing for a fair and thorough review of the incident. Question 14. What factors determine the legality and ethical permissibility of a police officer's immediate actions upon arriving at a scene where a serious crime is suspected to have occurred, and evidence may be present and in danger of being lost? Option A. The officer's personal belief about the suspect's guilt and the perceived urgency of making an arrest. Option B. The desire to gather as much information as possible quickly, regardless of procedural rules, to impress superiors. Option C. The potential for media attention and public perception of the police response. Option D. The presence of probable cause, the existence of exigent circumstances, and the potential for immediate destruction of evidence. The correct answer is D. The presence of probable cause, the existence of exigent circumstances, and the potential for immediate destruction of evidence. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a police officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and ensure the integrity of evidence. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering the urgency of the crime, the potential for evidence destruction, and the legal boundaries of their authority. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising the investigation or violating constitutional protections. The correct approach involves prioritizing the preservation of potential evidence while respecting the rights of individuals involved. This means conducting a lawful search based on probable cause or a valid warrant, or in exigent circumstances, and meticulously documenting all actions taken. This approach aligns with the principles of due process and the exclusionary rule, ensuring that any evidence obtained is admissible in court and that the investigation is conducted ethically and legally. The regulatory framework for police academies in Romania, as reflected in the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy entrance exam, emphasizes adherence to the Romanian Constitution, the Code of Criminal Procedure, and internal regulations governing police conduct and evidence handling. These frameworks mandate that searches and seizures must be based on legal grounds and conducted in a manner that respects individual liberties. An incorrect approach that involves immediate, warrantless entry and search without establishing exigent circumstances would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates the fundamental right to privacy and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as enshrined in the Romanian Constitution. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found, jeopardizing the prosecution of the offender. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying the search to obtain a warrant when exigent circumstances clearly exist, could result in the destruction of crucial evidence, hindering the investigation and failing to uphold the public's safety and the pursuit of justice. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the practical application of legal principles in dynamic situations. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on apprehending a suspect without considering the preservation of potential evidence at the scene, would also be a failure, as it overlooks the comprehensive nature of criminal investigations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a rapid assessment of the situation, identifying potential threats and the urgency of the response. This assessment should then be overlaid with an understanding of the applicable legal provisions, such as the conditions for warrantless searches, e.g., exigent circumstances, consent, plain view, and the requirements for obtaining warrants. Ethical consideration, including the principle of proportionality and the duty to act with integrity, must guide every action. Documentation is paramount throughout the process, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that accepting the suspect's immediate, informal confession to a serious crime could lead to a faster case closure and potentially save investigative resources, but it bypasses standard legal procedures for obtaining statements. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the police officer? Option A. Politely acknowledge the suspect's statement, inform them of their right to remain silent and their right to legal counsel, and then proceed to formally interview them in accordance with the Code of Criminal Procedure, ensuring the statement is recorded properly. Option B. Dismiss the suspect's statement as unreliable due to the informal setting and continue with the investigation as if no admission had been made. Option C. Immediately accept the confession as a solved case, documenting the informal admission to expedite the administrative process. Option D. Advise the suspect that their informal statement is not legally binding and encourage them to wait for legal representation before making any formal admissions. The correct answer is A. Politely acknowledge the suspect's statement, inform them of their right to remain silent and their right to legal counsel, and then proceed to formally interview them in accordance with the Code of Criminal Procedure, ensuring the statement is recorded properly. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate perceived benefit of a swift resolution against the fundamental principles of due process and the integrity of evidence. A police officer's duty is to uphold the law impartially, which includes ensuring that any confession or admission is obtained legally and ethically, without coercion or undue influence. The pressure to close a case quickly, especially when a suspect appears cooperative, can create a temptation to overlook procedural safeguards. The correct approach involves prioritizing the integrity of the investigation and the rights of the suspect over expediency. This means ensuring that any statement obtained is voluntary and admissible in court. The officer must understand that, while a confession might seem to solve the case, a confession obtained improperly can lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence, jeopardizing the entire prosecution and undermining public trust in law enforcement. The legal framework governing police conduct in Romania, as it would be understood within the context of the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy, emphasizes adherence to the Code of Criminal Procedure, which outlines strict rules for questioning suspects and obtaining statements. These rules are designed to protect individuals from self-incrimination under duress and to ensure the reliability of evidence. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the informal questioning and acceptance of the suspect's statement without proper legal safeguards. Failure to adhere to procedural requirements, such as informing the suspect of their rights, ensuring legal representation is available if requested, and formally recording the statement in accordance with legal mandates, constitutes a significant ethical and regulatory breach. Such an action could be seen as a violation of the suspect's fundamental rights and could lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible, thereby hindering justice. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the suspect's statement entirely due to the lack of formal procedure, even if the suspect genuinely wishes to confess. While caution is necessary, completely disregarding a voluntary admission without exploring its admissibility under proper legal conditions would also be a failure in professional duty. The professional decision-making process in such situation should involve a clear understanding of the legal boundaries and ethical obligations. The officer must first assess the situation, recognizing the potential for both a swift resolution and a compromised investigation. The guiding principle should always be the adherence to the law and the protection of individual rights. This involves consulting relevant legal provisions, such as those concerning the rights of suspects and the admissibility of evidence, and if necessary, seeking guidance from superiors or legal advisors. The ultimate goal is to achieve justice through lawful and ethical means, ensuring that any outcome is robust and defensible in court. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of prospective applicants to the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy come from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, with some facing challenges in accessing preparatory resources. A candidate, known to the admissions committee member for their dedication, but also for their limited access to specialized training materials, expresses concerns about their preparedness for the upcoming entrance examination. The committee member is aware of the general thematic areas that will be covered in the examination. Which of the following approaches best adheres to the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines for the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy entrance exam regarding fairness and integrity of the admission process? Option A. Advise the candidate to focus their preparation on the general thematic areas that will be covered in the examination, emphasizing the importance of thorough study of all syllabus components without revealing specific question types or content. Option B. Offer to provide the candidate with a private tutoring session focused on the most challenging aspects of the syllabus, using materials that are exclusive to the Academy's internal training. Option C. Inform the candidate that the examination is designed to assess general knowledge and aptitude, and that no specific preparation beyond reviewing the official syllabus is necessary or permitted. Option D. Provide the candidate with a list of specific topics that are highly likely to appear in the examination, along with suggested study materials that are not publicly available. The correct answer is A. Advise the candidate to focus their preparation on the general thematic areas that will be covered in the examination, emphasizing the importance of thorough study of all syllabus components without revealing specific question types or content. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain the integrity of the admission process and uphold the principles of fairness and equal opportunity, as mandated by the regulations governing the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. The core difficulty lies in balancing the desire to assist a candidate with a perceived disadvantage against the strict adherence to established admission criteria and the prevention of any undue influence or preferential treatment. The Academy's regulatory framework, which prioritizes merit and objective evaluation, prohibits any actions that could compromise the impartiality of the selection process. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the candidate's application based solely on the established admission criteria, without any deviation or special consideration due to their background. This aligns with the regulatory requirement for transparency, objectivity, and equal treatment of all applicants. The Academy's guidelines emphasize that admission decisions must be based on demonstrable qualifications and performance in the selection stages, ensuring that only the most suitable candidates are admitted, thereby maintaining the high standards expected of future law enforcement officers. An incorrect approach that involves providing the candidate with advance information about the exam content or specific questions would constitute a severe ethical and regulatory violation. This action directly undermines the principle of fair competition and creates an unfair advantage. Violating the Academy's commitment to meritocracy would also be a breach of trust and could lead to the admission of individuals who are not genuinely qualified, potentially compromising the Academy's reputation and the effectiveness of its graduates. Another incorrect approach, such as suggesting the candidate focus on specific areas without revealing actual exam content, while seemingly less direct, still carries significant ethical risks. This could be interpreted as an attempt to steer the candidate's preparation in a way that is not universally available to all applicants, thereby creating an indirect advantage. It blurs the lines of impartiality and could still be seen as a form of preferential treatment, which is contrary to the Academy's commitment to a level playing field. The professional decision-making process in such situations requires a clear understanding of the Academy's admission regulations and ethical code. Professionals must prioritize objectivity, fairness, and transparency. When faced with a situation where a candidate's background might elicit sympathy, the focus must remain on the established, objective criteria for admission. Any action that deviates from these criteria or could be perceived as providing an unfair advantage must be avoided. The guiding principle is to uphold the integrity of the selection process and ensure that all candidates are evaluated on their own merits, in accordance with the law and the Academy's internal regulations. Question 17. The control framework reveals that during a simulated traffic stop exercise, a cadet observes their close friend, another cadet, deliberately falsifying a report to conceal a minor infraction they committed. The friend notices the observation and pleads with the cadet to overlook it, citing their long-standing friendship and the potential negative impact on their academy standing. What is the most appropriate course of action for the cadet who witnessed the falsification? Option A. Immediately report the observed falsification to the supervising instructor or designated academy authority, detailing the incident and the individuals involved. Option B. Confront the friend privately and strongly urge them to confess their actions to the instructor, but do not report it themselves unless the friend refuses. Option C. Advise the friend to correct the report themselves and promise to keep the incident confidential, relying on the friend's assurance of future honesty. Option D. Discuss the situation with other trusted cadets to gauge their opinions before deciding on a course of action. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the observed falsification to the supervising instructor or designated academy authority, detailing the incident and the individuals involved. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation of a future police officer to uphold the law and maintain public trust, even when faced with personal relationships that might create a conflict of interest. The core of the challenge lies in balancing loyalty to a friend with the duty to report potential criminal activity observed during a training exercise. The Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy entrance exam emphasizes integrity and adherence to legal and ethical standards from the outset. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the observed infraction to the designated academy instructor or supervisor. This aligns with the fundamental principles of law enforcement, which mandate reporting of all observed criminal activity, regardless of personal connections. The regulatory framework for police academies in Romania, as implied by the exam's jurisdiction, stresses the importance of impartiality, integrity, and the duty to act in accordance with the law. Reporting the incident upholds these principles by ensuring that all cadets are held to the same standards and that any potential misconduct is addressed appropriately, thereby safeguarding the academy's reputation and the integrity of future law enforcement officers. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed infraction due to the personal relationship. This failure constitutes a breach of professional duty and ethical conduct. It implies a willingness to overlook illegal activity, which directly contradicts the core values of law enforcement and the training objectives of the academy. Such inaction could be interpreted as complicity or a lack of integrity, undermining the trust placed in future officers. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the friend directly and encourage them to stop without reporting the incident. While seemingly a less severe deviation, this still falls short of the required professional standard. It bypasses the established reporting mechanisms and places the responsibility for enforcement on an individual outside the formal chain of command. This can lead to inconsistent application of rules, potential for further concealment, and a failure to address the root cause of the misconduct within the academy's training environment. It also risks damaging the professional relationship with the instructor or supervisor by withholding crucial information. A third incorrect approach would be to discuss the incident with other cadets before reporting. This constitutes gossip and can create a negative or biased atmosphere within the academy. It also risks spreading misinformation or influencing perceptions before the facts are officially established through the proper reporting channels. Professional decision-making in such situations requires adherence to established protocols, prioritizing transparency and accountability over personal discretion or peer influence. The decision-making process should involve identifying the relevant ethical obligations, consulting the academy's internal regulations and code of conduct, and acting decisively and transparently through the appropriate reporting channels. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing concern regarding potential security vulnerabilities within the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's information systems. A junior officer has proposed a risk assessment strategy that involves immediately flagging any employee who has expressed dissent or criticism of current academy policies, based on anecdotal reports from colleagues. This approach is presented as a swift measure to identify potential internal threats. Option A. Immediately initiate disciplinary proceedings against all employees identified as having expressed dissent or criticism, based on the assumption that such expressions inherently represent a security risk. Option B. Focus the risk assessment solely on external cyber threats, as internal dissent is considered a matter of human resources rather than security, and therefore outside the scope of a security risk assessment. Option C. Rely on the anecdotal reports from colleagues to create a watch list of individuals, prioritizing those who have been most vocal in their criticism, and monitor their activities closely without further investigation. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by systematically identifying potential threats, analyzing their likelihood and impact based on verifiable data and intelligence, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies in line with established security protocols. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by systematically identifying potential threats, analyzing their likelihood and impact based on verifiable data and intelligence, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies in line with established security protocols. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the potential for overreach or misinterpretation of information. The Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's regulatory framework emphasizes a duty of care and the importance of maintaining public trust. Therefore, any approach to risk assessment must be grounded in established procedures and ethical considerations, ensuring that actions are proportionate and justified. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based assessment of potential threats, aligning with the Academy's mandate to ensure security and operational integrity. This method prioritizes objective analysis and adherence to established protocols for information gathering and evaluation. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of responsible policing and institutional security, which demand that risk assessments be thorough, impartial, and focused on actionable intelligence rather than speculation. The regulatory framework for police academies in Romania, as reflected in their entrance exam guidelines, stresses the importance of due diligence and the application of sound judgment in all operational matters, including security assessments. An approach that relies on unsubstantiated rumors or personal biases is professionally unacceptable because it deviates from the principles of objective evidence and due process. Such an approach risks misallocating resources, unfairly targeting individuals, and eroding trust within the institution and with the public. It fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a fact-based assessment and can lead to ethical breaches by acting on unfounded suspicions. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on past incidents without considering current context or evolving threats, is also professionally flawed. While historical data is valuable, a static risk assessment can become obsolete, leaving the Academy vulnerable to new or altered risks. This approach neglects the dynamic nature of security and fails to meet the regulatory expectation for continuous evaluation and adaptation of security measures. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing immediate public perception over thorough risk analysis, is equally problematic. While public image is important, it should not dictate security protocols. Decisions must be based on a comprehensive understanding of potential risks, not on the desire to appear decisive without proper substantiation. This can lead to hasty and ineffective measures that do not address the root causes of potential threats. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This typically includes identifying potential threats, analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating existing controls, and determining appropriate mitigation strategies. All steps must be documented, and decisions should be justifiable based on evidence and in accordance with the Academy's governing regulations and ethical codes. Question 19. Compliance review shows that a patrol officer received an anonymous tip regarding a citizen's alleged involvement in minor property crimes. The tip, while specific in detail, lacks any verifiable source or corroborating evidence. The officer is considering approaching the citizen directly to question them about the allegations without any prior investigation or consultation with superiors. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Immediately approach the citizen and confront them with the allegations, demanding an explanation based on the anonymous tip. Option B. Ignore the tip entirely as it is anonymous and lacks any corroboration, and continue with routine patrol duties. Option C. Document the tip, attempt to verify its credibility through discreet and lawful means without direct confrontation, and consult with a supervisor before taking any further action. Option D. Contact the informant directly to pressure them for more details, even if it means making promises or threats to elicit information. Correct answer is C. Document the tip, attempt to verify its credibility through discreet and lawful means without direct confrontation, and consult with a supervisor before taking any further action. Explanation. The scenario presents a common ethical dilemma faced by law enforcement officers, balancing the need for information with the imperative to uphold individual rights and procedural fairness. The challenge lies in the potential for information obtained through informal channels to be unreliable, biased, or even fabricated, while simultaneously recognizing that such information can sometimes be crucial for preventing crime or apprehending suspects. A hasty or unauthorized approach to gathering this information risks violating legal statutes and ethical codes governing police conduct, potentially compromising the integrity of an investigation and leading to legal repercussions. The correct approach involves a structured, lawful, and ethical method of information gathering. This entails verifying the source of the information, assessing its credibility, and ensuring that any subsequent actions taken are based on legally admissible evidence and adhere to established police procedures. Specifically, it requires officers to act within the bounds of their authority, respecting privacy and due process, and to document all steps taken meticulously. This aligns with the principles of legality, accountability, and professionalism mandated by the regulatory framework governing the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy. An incorrect approach would be to act solely on the unverified tip without further corroboration or adherence to proper procedure. This could manifest as an immediate, intrusive action against the individual based on hearsay, bypassing established protocols for surveillance, evidence collection, or obtaining warrants. Such an approach directly contravenes the principles of presumption of innocence and the right to a fair trial, as enshrined in Romanian law and police ethics. It also demonstrates a failure to exercise sound professional judgment, potentially leading to the dismissal of evidence, disciplinary action against the officer, and damage to public trust. Another incorrect approach might involve pressuring the informant for more details in a manner that is coercive or exploitative, thereby violating ethical guidelines and potentially creating legal liabilities for the police force. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legality, ethical conduct, and evidence-based action. This involves a systematic evaluation of the information received, considering its source, content, and potential implications. The framework should guide officers to seek corroboration through legitimate means, consult with supervisors when necessary, and always act within the scope of their legal authority and departmental policies. This ensures that actions are justifiable, defensible, and contribute to the effective and lawful administration of justice. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that candidates for the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy entrance exam must strictly adhere to the specified regulatory framework. If a candidate, when answering a question about the exam's jurisdiction requirements, were to incorporate principles from a different country's police academy entrance exam regulations, because they believe those principles offered a more robust understanding of jurisdictional issues, which approach would be considered a failure to meet the exam's core requirements. Option A. Explaining the importance of jurisdictional compliance in general terms without specific reference to the exam's rules. Option B. Introducing regulations from another country's police academy entrance exam to supplement the answer. Option C. Focusing solely on the conceptual understanding of jurisdiction without referencing any specific regulations. Option D. Prioritizing the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's specific regulatory framework and guidelines for the exam. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's specific regulatory framework and guidelines for the exam. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy entrance exam places significant emphasis on the candidate's understanding of the foundational principles and ethical considerations inherent in law enforcement. This scenario is professionally challenging because it tests a candidate's ability to navigate a situation where personal biases could conflict with the objective application of rules and regulations, a core tenet of police work. The requirement for absolute priority in adhering to the specified regulatory framework for the exam itself highlights the importance of strict adherence to rules, even when faced with external pressures or perceived inefficiencies. The correct approach involves a candidate meticulously adhering to the Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's specific entrance exam regulations, prioritizing the explicit instructions provided for question formatting and content. This is justified by the exam's stated objective: to assess candidates' ability to follow directives and operate within a defined legal and procedural framework. The emphasis on only the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for exam, Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy entrance exam, and strict jurisdiction compliance underscores that any deviation, however minor or seemingly logical from an external perspective, constitutes a failure to meet the fundamental requirements of the assessment. This reflects the real-world expectation that law enforcement officers must operate strictly within the bounds of the law and departmental policy, without personal interpretation or external influence. Incorrect approaches would involve introducing external regulatory frameworks, even if they appear more comprehensive or relevant in a general context. For instance, referencing regulations from other countries, or using generic regulatory terms when a specific jurisdiction. The Alexandru Ioan Cuza Police Academy's exam framework is mandated, demonstrates a failure to grasp the critical importance of jurisdictional boundaries and specific rule adherence. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, because it indicates an inability to distinguish between applicable and inapplicable rules, a deficiency that could have serious consequences in law enforcement. Another incorrect approach would be to deviate from the specified formatting or content requirements, even if the candidate believes they are improving the answer or making it more comprehensive. This shows a disregard for explicit instructions, which is a direct contravention of the exam's stated purpose and a critical flaw in professional judgment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations requires a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand and internalize all specified rules, regulations, and guidelines. Second, identify the precise scope and jurisdiction of these rules. Third, critically evaluate any external information or potential interpretations against the primary directive. Finally, prioritize strict adherence to the mandated framework, recognizing that compliance with specific instructions is often a primary assessment criterion, especially in fields requiring high levels of discipline and adherence to protocol.